I was never supposed to speak about this, but since leaving the Pentagon, I can't keep it buried any longer. The name Nikola Tesla has always floated in conspiracy circles. People talk about his inventions, his eccentric personality, his tragic downfall. But what most of the public doesn't know is that Tesla was never just an inventor. He was a man who stood at the intersection of science and something far stranger. I saw the files myself. In a locked archive, deep within the Pentagon, Tesla's name appeared again and again, tied not to patents or research, but to programs with titles so vague they screamed secrecy. Project Kronos, Resonance Experiments 0 Point. These weren't the fantasies of delusional mind. They were classified reports stamped with the highest levels of clearance. And the deeper I read, the more I realized the Pentagon never let go of Tesla. When Tesla died in 1943, his hotel room in New York was raided within hours. The official story says the Office of Alien Property seized his belongings, as if Tesla were just some foreign scientist. But that was a lie. The truth is, the Pentagon already knew what Tesla had been working on, blueprints for technology decades ahead of its time. I saw photographs of his confiscated journals, sketches of machines that didn't just generate power, but manipulated it in ways we still struggle to understand. One drawing showed a lattice of overlapping waves, marked with notes about piercing the veil of time. Another detailed an antenna array that could send energy not across cities, but across dimensions. The files weren't just about energy. They were about control, surveillance, and even weaponization. Tesla wasn't just a scientist. He was a threat to the established order. The Pentagon didn't simply archive Tesla's work. They tried to replicate it. The documents I read described covert projects in the late 1940s and 1950s, where Tesla's resonant frequency research was tested in military labs. One experiment aimed to destabilize solid matter using vibration alone, essentially shaking objects apart at the atomic level. Imagine a weapon that could reduce a building to rubble without a single bomb. Another file mentioned directed energy systems, the precursor to what today we call beam weapons. Tesla's blueprints were decades ahead of laser technology. And yet, what disturbed me most was the mention of psychotronic resonance. According to the files, Tesla believed the human mind could be influenced by carefully tuned electromagnetic fields. That wasn't science fiction. It was a foundation for entire programs of psychological warfare. But it wasn't just about weapons. Tesla believed his greatest discovery was what he called the universal frequency, a natural vibration that connected all living beings, the planet itself, and perhaps even other worlds. In one of the documents, there was a chilling note written in Tesla's own handwriting. If we can tune into the right frequency, we can speak across time itself. The Pentagon treated this as more than eccentric rambling. In fact, they assigned entire research divisions to explore the possibility of time communication. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Projects that hinted at messages being sent not just across space, but into the past and future. The idea that Tesla had unlocked a pathway through time was terrifying, because if the Pentagon had even a fragment of success, it meant history itself could be rewritten from the shadows. Tesla's obsession with energy was never just about electricity. He spoke of limitless power drawn directly from the fabric of the universe, what he called the ether. To most, that sounded like mysticism, but the Pentagon took it very seriously. In the classified papers, I saw early diagrams of devices labeled as energy extractors based on Tesla's unpublished notes. The principle was terrifyingly simple. Pull energy not from coal, oil, or nuclear fuel, but from an invisible sea of energy all around us. If this were real, and the Pentagon believed it was, then it would make every oil company, every utility grid, every government that relied on energy control completely obsolete. That was why Tesla was silenced. Free energy wasn't just about lighting homes. It was about collapsing entire empires built on power and money. One of the most chilling files I encountered referenced something called the death beam. The mainstream story is that Tesla claimed he could build a particle weapon capable of shooting down planes from hundreds of miles away. Historians dismiss it as fantasy, but in the Pentagon archives, there were diagrams, schematics with technical notes that suggested prototypes were actually constructed. They described focused streams of accelerated particles, channeled through magnetic fields, powerful enough to melt steel in seconds. The documents didn't just describe theory. They referenced test sites in remote deserts and witnesses who reported seeing beams of light cutting through the night sky. Tesla's so-called death ray wasn't a myth. It was a foundation for directed energy weapons, the same type of technology the military still denies exists publicly, while quietly funding it behind closed doors. But Tesla's vision extended far beyond weapons. One file described his experiments with wireless transmission of power. Imagine a world where no cables, no infrastructure, no grids are needed, where entire cities could run off towers beaming energy through the air. Tesla tested this at Wardenclyffe Tower, but according to classified notes, his experiments were far more successful than history records. There were reports of bulbs lit miles away, motors running without wires, entire towns secretly powered during field tests. The Pentagon documents suggested that Wardenclyffe wasn't abandoned because it failed. It was shut down because it succeeded. A working system of wireless energy meant governments couldn't meter, tax, or control it. And for the Pentagon, that made Tesla not a hero, but a danger. His dream of a liberated humanity clashed directly with the ambitions of those who sought dominance. As I read further, the files became darker, stranger. Tesla's experiments weren't only technological, they were spiritual, almost otherworldly. He wrote of hearing voices, not in madness, but in frequencies. He claimed to pick up signals not from Earth, but from beyond, messages encoded in the very fabric of the cosmos. The Pentagon classified these writings under non-human communications. It was clear they feared what Tesla might have uncovered. Could it be that he had tapped into something more, an intelligence watching us, guiding us, or warning us? Tesla's words suggested he believed humanity was not alone, and that his inventions were a way of opening a channel. The Pentagon's notes concluded coldly, potential contact, must contain and monitor. In that moment, I realized Tesla hadn't just threatened the world's power structure. He may have threatened the very secrecy of our existence in the universe. One of the items that chilled me was a shipment manifest. Crates labeled with Tesla's name, routed through military channels in 1943 and delivered to a secure research facility in the desert Southwest. The manifest was mundane, dates, serial numbers, signatures, but an attached memo changed everything. Material assessment required. Do not publicize. Inside the crate descriptions were references to oscillatory coils, tuned resonators, and something curiously labeled chronometric test apparatus. The lab logs that followed recorded anomalous experimental runs, meter jumps, timing errors, clocks losing and gaining time inexplicably during activation cycles. Engineers recorded the sensation of temporal slip in qualitative notes. They were laughed at in public, but terrified in private. The Pentagon didn't dismiss the reports. They created a new project code, reassigned classified funding, and convened physicists who had previously only whispered about speculative theories. What we saw in those logs wasn't science fiction. It was a chain of events suggesting that Tesla's work had produced measurable perturbations in timekeeping, tiny, repeatable anomalies that no instrumentation should have shown. And when instruments behave in ways we don't understand, institutions with power either destroy the instruments or weaponize the phenomenon. There were other pieces that tied Tesla's legacy to later government programs. I found cross-references between his notebooks and early Cold War projects, names like Resonance Initiative, Project Aurora, and obscure Navy contracts for nonlinear field propagation. Engineers who later worked on experimental aircraft and speculative propulsion systems referenced Tesla's math in private memos. In one particularly revealing exchange, a contractor wrote, "We're following the lattice equations from the Tesla folios. If the scaling holds, directional energy transference is possible on a practical level. Translate that into plain language. The men and women in these programs believed Tesla's formulas could be scaled up into operational systems. The ethical and geopolitical implications were enormous. If you can beam energy across continents or influence structural integrity via resonance, you possess a strategic dominance that can render traditional force obsolete. That's not merely a technological breakthrough. It's a tectonic shift in how wars and power are waged." The reason much of this stayed hidden was simple. Once you know, you can't unknow, and those who control knowledge control futures. Equally troubling were the human consequences recorded in personnel files. Scientists involved in replication efforts often developed odd maladies, migraine clusters, sudden onset deafness in laboratory environments, and persistent vertigo that conventional medicine could not explain. One post-operational report described a technician who reported audible harmonics when near the resonator and who later became mute. The report's clinical tone masked the torment beneath. Colleagues testified he would stare at empty space and whisper frequencies under his breath that no one else could hear. Some veterans of the programs later exhibited behavior that matched descriptions from earlier decades: isolation, obsession with patterns, and almost cult-like devotion to discovering the right frequency. The institutional response was systematic: reassign, reclassify, and when necessary, medicate. That pattern should alarm anyone who believes science exists to serve humanity. Here, the machinery of secrecy converted curiosity into compartmentalized risk and then buried the people who bore the cost. The files made clear one ugly fact: knowledge without accountability becomes an engine of harm. Perhaps the most consequential discovery was diplomatic in nature. I found cables between defense and foreign liaison offices noting interest, not just from allies but from adversaries. In Tesla's oeuvre, one missive from a European station read, "Soviet delegations are requesting clarification on historical Tesla patents. Intelligence suggests targeted acquisition of materials." Another cable, redacted heavily, alluded to clandestine recoveries in remote sites, with language implying covert retrievals and neutralizations of undesirable artifacts. The Cold War we now know was as much a race for minds and ideas as it was for missiles. Whoever could harness Tesla-derived principles first would have a geopolitical edge unlike any before. That's why so much of this occurred in the shadows, because the stakes were existential. When technology confers a capacity to shape environments, influence populations, or disrupt critical infrastructure without a single kinetic strike, it becomes the ultimate asymmetric weapon. Reading those cables, I felt the weight of a decades-long invisible contest, one in which Tesla's ghost, his blueprints and his warnings, was an unacknowledged prize. Tesla's relationship with the U.S. government had always been complicated. On the one hand, he was admired for his genius, often referred to as the man who lit the world. On the other hand, his relentless pursuit of ideas that defied the established order made him a threat to those in power. While Edison basked in fame and corporate partnerships, Tesla spent his later years isolated, his project starved of funding. But here's the truth the public didn't know. Deep within the Pentagon's archives lie documents proving that officials from the Department of War had been monitoring Tesla for decades. They weren't simply curious about his wireless energy projects. They were terrified of what they might unleash. Unlimited power that couldn't be taxed, controlled, or monopolized. For corporations and governments alike, this wasn't innovation. It was an existential threat. The files even suggest that operatives were planted around him, under the guise of assistants and sponsors, ensuring they could report his every move. Tesla wasn't just struggling against poverty and obscurity. He was up against an invisible wall built by those who feared a world that he might create. What happened to Tesla's notebooks after his death remains one of the most suspicious cover-ups in history. Official records say that representatives from the Office of Alien Property seized his belongings within hours of his passing in 1943. They claimed it was routine due to his foreign citizenship, despite the fact that Tesla had lived most of his life in the United States. But the Pentagon files suggest something far more calculated. According to classified reports, within days, select scientists were granted access to Tesla's documents. Engineers from MIT, physicists connected to Los Alamos, and individuals with ties to the Manhattan Project. Why would nuclear scientists be interested in the private notes of an aging inventor? The answer becomes clearer when you consider what Tesla had been working on in his final years: directed energy weapons, planetary resonance experiments, and communication devices that could operate across any distance without wires. The Pentagon didn't just want to secure his research. They wanted to weaponize it before anyone else could. What the public remembers as the lonely end of forgotten genius was, in reality, the beginning of a new era of classified military technology. The Pentagon's internal memos describe Tesla's concept of the death ray not as mere science fiction, but as a blueprint for something real. Tesla had claimed that his particle beam weapon could destroy entire fleets of aircraft from hundreds of miles away, making wars obsolete. The official narrative dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man desperate for attention. But in truth, declassified records show that defense officials had blueprints of the device stored in restricted archives. They debated endlessly whether to pursue the technology or bury it. Some feared that if this weapon worked, it would destabilize the delicate balance of global power. Others argued it was too dangerous to even attempt. Yet, field reports from the 1950s mention early prototypes tested under different names, hinting that Tesla's ideas didn't die with him. They were quietly absorbed and rebranded as advanced defense research. To this day, rumors circulate about energy-based weapons being deployed in secret conflicts, their origins tied directly to Tesla's forbidden science. But perhaps the most disturbing entry comes from files labeled Project Resonance. According to these documents, Tesla's obsession with frequencies and vibrations wasn't eccentricity. It was a discovery. He believed the Earth itself had natural resonant frequencies, and that tapping into them could unleash unimaginable energy. In his experiments, he claimed to have created artificial earthquakes in Colorado Springs. The Pentagon knew this was more than bragging. Engineers confirmed that under the right conditions, resonance could destabilize entire structures or even regions. Imagine a weapon that could trigger natural disasters. An earthquake here, a storm there, all disguised as acts of nature. The file suggests that Tesla's resonance research was locked away under the highest classification, later influencing projects that the public only whispers about today: weather control programs, seismic weapons, and HARP-like facilities. The truth is, the government didn't just silence Tesla. They inherited his power and ensured the world would never know it came from him. Another shocking revelation is tied to Tesla's work on wireless power transmission. He envisioned a world where energy flowed freely through the air, harvested from the natural electromagnetic field of the planet. Imagine a society without power lines, without fuel costs, without monopolies controlling energy. The Pentagon documents confirm that Tesla had made more progress than anyone realized. In one report, an agent noted, "His tower is not for communication. It is a weapon and a power plant in one." They feared that if such technology were unleashed, global industries would collapse overnight. Oil companies, utility providers, even military supply chains would become obsolete. The decision was made not to suppress Tesla entirely, but to selectively integrate his discoveries. His wireless power experiments were studied, adapted, and hidden behind classified programs in defense research. What the world saw as a collapse of Tesla's grand dreams was, in reality, the quiet repurposing of his genius for control rather than liberation. Even more unsettling is the possibility that Tesla was not working alone in his most radical discoveries. Some files hint at communications with unknown entities during his later experiments. Tesla himself often spoke of receiving signals from outer space while conducting radio research. The mainstream press mocked him, painting him as delusional. Yet, Pentagon files suggest that intercepted transmissions during Tesla's experiments match signals of unknown origin. Were these extraterrestrial communications? Or perhaps encrypted messages Tesla stumbled upon? The truth remains buried, but the documents imply that the government was less concerned about who Tesla was contacting and more concerned about what information was being exchanged. If Tesla had indeed opened a channel to something or someone beyond Earth, then his inventions were not only technological breakthroughs, but also potential bridges to an intelligence that humanity was not ready to face. And that, above all else, might explain why his research was seized, classified, and never returned to the world. Tesla's sudden death in 1943 was not the quiet passing of an old, forgotten inventor. It was a perfect opportunity for the Pentagon to seize everything he left behind. Within hours, government agents raided his New York hotel room, confiscating trunks filled with notebooks, schematics, and private journals. The public was told these papers contained nothing of importance, but internal records contradict that claim. Several items were never cataloged, never returned, and are believed to remain in secure vaults even now. Some analysts argue that Tesla's designs may have directly influenced Cold War technologies, radar, directed energy weapons, and even early concepts of the Strategic Defense Initiative. Others whisper that his most advanced discoveries were never developed publicly, only parceled out into classified projects under different code names. In the Pentagon's own words, Tesla's legacy is not that of a failed dreamer, but of a prophet whose visions remain too disruptive for mankind to handle. That phrase alone is enough to suggest the depth of what they are still hiding. And this is a truth that no one wants you to know. Nikola Tesla may have been the greatest scientific mind of the modern age, but his genius was not erased. It was absorbed, controlled, and locked away by those who feared what it could unleash. The free energy he promised was turned into classified military research. His dream of weapons that could end wars was twisted into tools of power. His experiments with resonance and vibrations became precursors to programs that manipulate the very fabric of our planet. And his whispers of communication with forces beyond Earth remain one of the Pentagon's deepest secrets. When you hear his name today, it is often in the context of eccentricity or myth. But the documents tell another story, a story of knowledge too dangerous for the public, too valuable for the powerful, and too mysterious to ever be fully revealed. Tesla didn't just imagine the future. He built it, and the Pentagon made sure it would never belong to us.